Mac Power Users, episode 636, Workflows with Ryan J.A. Murphy. Hello and welcome back to Mac Power Users. My name is Stephen Hackett, and I, of course, am joined by the man who's never missed an episode, Mr. David Sparks.
Man, I'm afraid I said that now. It's going to happen. It'll be like next week or something.
It's totally fine. You can take a week off.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thanks, Stephen. It's good to talk to you. And we're really happy to have a guest with us. Welcome to the show, Ryan J.A. Murphy.
Thanks. And thanks for hitting those two middle initials.
Well, every time. I know it's your branding, so we got to get it.
It's just my parents' fault, really.
Yeah. Yeah. But Ryan is, I think I first became aware of you, Ryan, actually in the Mac Power Users forums, but you are like all over the place. Like when I started getting into Obsidian, you've been writing plugins for Obsidian, and you've done a lot of really cool stuff for people. You've got a blog over at, and I forgot the name. It's got a cool name. What is it?
It's Axle.design.
Axle. Yes. Yeah. Axle. Yeah. AXLE.design. And Ryan is super interested in more, the type of stuff I call contextual computing, but Ryan's taken it to a new level. And I've just been a fan of you from afar, Ryan, and I'm so glad you could take time to join us today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, it's such a cool place to be talking to you guys about all this stuff. It's funny, I only found MPU, must have been like 3 years ago now. You've been running a lot longer than that, but maybe we'll get into my story into getting into the Mac, but I was a Windows Power user for a while. It was neat to get over here and see sort of what's happening in the Mac Power user space, not just with the podcast, but with all the ecosystem when I first got into it probably about a decade ago now.
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody recently in the Mac Spark 8 Labs, and I had mentioned, because they were saying, how come you don't have a forum? I'm like, well, I think the MPU forum is really good. And this person said, I didn't even know that existed. And it's like, I feel like I got to keep saying it, because it's just a very loving community of nice people that are all interested in getting the most out of their Apple tech. I love it when I do like a search on the web for some problem I have, and the answer comes up in the Mac Power Users forums. That's awesome. So anyway, it's just a great community. I'm glad you're a part of it, and we're really happy to have you on the show.
Yeah, well, thanks for hosting both the forum and the show.
Today on More Power Users, we've got a very deep topic, something that we need to work on, and it's about recipe apps. There's a lot of action going on in recipe apps, and we thought that would be fun to dig in on today. Yeah, but anyway, so Ryan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so people probably have seen me around the web talking about tech, mostly from the perspective of I guess where I come from in a PhD world. So I'm a PhD candidate studying information systems. And actually, information systems, if you're not familiar with it, we're all really using information systems. It's just the ability to store information and then use it to act on the world around us. And so that kind of field, that research has me working on and very interested in how we use tech to solve problems, how we use tech to augment our intelligence. And that's the kind of thing that I've been posting on the blog on Axle.design, as well as some academic workflows. And I should also mention that I do a lot of work in systems consulting. So I'm a systemic designer. I work with groups like the World Wildlife Fund and the UN, or the UN Special Joint Programs, I should say, was one of my recent clients, on trying to understand complex problems and solve them. So I use tools like, it really ends up being pretty simple. Tools like OmniGraffle and Miro, and a web tool called Kumu to model systems and then understand them and develop strategies for change.
This like pushes all my buttons, Ryan. I just love the idea of systems thinking, and I think that really it underlies a lot of what we do at Mac Power Users, because what we're trying to do is enable people listening to the show to come up with the systems that work for them. And, not everything we talk about is going to resonate with everybody, but my goal is, if you listen to the show long enough, that you do find the system that works for you. And that can be applied, globally, like you're doing, or individually. I don't know. I just, when it started, first of all, I didn't even realize that was a thing you could do a PhD in. Of course, it makes perfect sense that you should be able to. But we're at this weird space now where people are becoming aware of this. Tiago Forte has the second brain, and we're not going to talk about Obsidian today, gang. Stephen has put the hammer down. But you have things like Craft, Obsidian, Rome Research, all these different kind of personal knowledge and management solutions coming up for people. And I don't know. I just feel like the thing you are studying overlaps with the trend right now in such a beautiful way.
We're getting right into it, are we?
Yeah. Well, I had to get that off my chest. And I also had to put it out there that I will not use the word Obsidian anymore.
You keep saying it. No.
I know. That's kind of the thing, right? That's the bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Obsidian, I'm not going to say Obsidian anymore.
Okay.
Because Stephen said I can't say the word Obsidian.
We just need a break. That's all. We just need a little bit of a break. Ryan, one thing that was really interesting in talking with you in advance of the episode today was this idea of systems and really how both broad and deep the concept of systematic thinking and systematic design can go. Could you give us kind of a working definition of what you mean when you're using those sorts of terms?
Sure. Can I also give you a innocent correction?
Of course.
You have to be careful. And this happens, you're not alone. This happens to a lot of people when you talk about systemic thinking. A lot of people end up inserting that word systematic in, but systematic, when you think about it, really is to do the same thing over and over again. But what we're talking about when we talk about systems thinking and systemic work is to understand how all the parts intersect and interact. And so systemic design, that field that I mentioned earlier, is the combination of systems thinking and design thinking. So it's trying to understand, person and computer, not just person, not just computer. And then through understanding the interaction of those things, come up with design solutions that can improve it. Most of the time when I do systemic design work, it's with problems like how do we help understand, say, the intersection of conservation and the pandemic that we're currently all in. So it's usually pretty global, but it applies on all kinds of levels, including the tools we use and how they combine and stack together. That makes sense?
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit of what you're doing with the UN?
Yeah, that was a project last year with my partners, I guess, Nanad Rava and Peter Jones, one of my co-authors. And we worked to try and analyze. They had funded a bunch of projects from a number of different nations. I think it was 20 or 30. And we were trying to look at how exactly those projects were designed from a systems perspective in order to provoke systems change. And so, we did this big analysis, and there's a talk I can link to about the work if other people are interested in diving in deeper.
And we just heard the about, so I haven't mentioned you're Canadian.
Yes, that's true. Newfoundlander, actually. So I'm calling you from half an hour ahead of Atlantic.
That is
our own special time zone.
I got to get up there someday. I got to get up there.
Yeah, it's lots of fun.
Yeah, and then so you've got the blog at Axel Design and Fulcra.design.
Exactly.
And then you're pursuing the PhD. You're already doing research in the field, and you are a fairly recent Mac nerd.
Fairly recent, as in 10 years probably now. But it was. I identify as a transitioned to Mac nerd because I was a Windows nerd for a long time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we want to get into the sort of lineage of devices, but...
Well, actually, I want to hear how that happened. How did you go from Windows to Mac? There are some people who get really good at Windows and have no desire to switch because they've figured it out.
Yeah, and I loved Windows. What happened was very simple. Back when I became a computer science student, so I've got a weird double degree in psych and computer science, and I became a computer science student, I think, around 2012. And at the time, Windows didn't allow you to use the Unix subsystem. There wasn't a Unix subsystem, and I might be misspeaking, I might be misremembering, but basically you couldn't do a lot of the terminal commands you'd use on Linux or on Mac on Windows. And so I had a choice. I could either, split off my Windows drive and install Linux and start playing around with that system. And I had never liked any Linux. It's just too fiddly for me. So I decided to go get a MacBook Air, and that was it.
The lure of the terminal.
Yeah. Terminal brought me in, and then Alfred Stuck is probably the key power tool that really I loved right away. I found Alfred and saw what you could do with that, and then with AppleScript and just the underlying layers of Mac OS and of the Apple ecosystem just like are so attractive, we'll say.
Yeah, I haven't actively used Windows for something like 10 years because I used to have to use it in a day job, but eventually got away from that. But the last time I used Windows, there just weren't applications like Alfred or Hazel or like these small developer, like awesome automation style applications. They, for whatever reason, they just didn't exist on Windows. I don't know. Is that still the case?
I couldn't say, but I don't think. I think the Mac ecosystem and the Apple ecosystem overall is still way ahead.
Yeah.
I remember one of the other attractors was the iPad at the time. Paper by 53 had just started to get advertised, and we're burning through all the topics I thought we'd talk about through the whole show in this first segment. But when so I've been a tablet user since 2006 or 2005. When I was in grade 11, I actually had a tablet PC. And loved being able to use a stylus on the screen with, I think it was Windows 7 at the time. And so we can talk about that more later, I guess. But when I saw Paper and the iPad and how fluid it was, I just was so excited to get an iPad. So that's the other thing.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And so now at this point, what kind of Mac are you driving today?
I've got one of the new MacBook Pros. I've chronicled sort of my troubles with the iPad over the years on the forum a little bit. We can get into that too. But for a little while there, I had a Mac Mini and an iPad, and I was trying to use the iPad around the house. And just like, as we've heard from you guys on the show a few times, I mean, really, what was I thinking? We were convinced, I think, all of us, by Stephen's constant advocacy for the iPad as a power device, right? Stephen, you just won't stop talking about how much you use the iPad. And no, I had been convinced to try using the iPad around the house, and by all the cool things that I'd heard about, and it just like wouldn't stick in terms of doing some of the simple things. So when the announcement came for these M1s, I've got an M1 Max in this machine, 64 gigs of RAM, and I was just like so fast. You know the time after the keynotes when the store is still closed, and you're just trying to get in and make a purchase. I had it open on like 3 or 4 different devices. I think I bought 2 at the same time and canceled one. Like I was so keen to get away from the Mac Mini and to pick up a laptop again.
So did you go with the 14 or the 16?
16.
Okay, and how do you like it?
Oh, it's a dream. It really is. I had a 2015 before. I skipped the butterfly keyboard era, and it was getting a bit hot, we'll say, the old MVP I had. So this thing is a dream. So powerful, so fast, so quiet.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of writing a blog post on just kind of like a check-in on having this laptop now for 6 months, and man, I just can't get over how good the screen is. I feel like we don't give that enough time on the show, but the screen on the new MacBook Pros are just amazing.
I make the mistake of keeping it closed most of the time, but I'm using it right now, and it is so crisp and so huge. It is really, really nice.
So you're using it with an external display?
Yeah, I've got it hooked up to. It's actually called I forget the name of it. It's a Samsung. It folds flush against the wall. A Samsung Space Monitor. That's what it's called. And it's pretty wacky. It's kind of, lately I've been noticing it. If it's not pushed right up against the wall, it's pretty wobbly. So I'm kind of annoyed with it from that perspective. But it can get really close to you if you want to, adjust, or it can go far away. It adjusts on an angle in a weird way. And so it's otherwise got a nice low profile bezel, and it is a nice display. I haven't been tempted by the Studio display, not yet anyway.
See, I've never heard of a space monitor. So it's presumably it's very thin. I mean, is the word space to mean that it has stars on it, or that it takes a little space?
It takes up very little space on the desktop. So the idea is that it's hinged and it hooks into the back of the desk without needing a Visa mount of any kind. And then when you want to push it out of the way, you just fold it up and push it out of the way. I don't do that very often. I just liked the pixel density and the aspect ratio, or the size, I should say. So that's why I went with it.
That's kind of, I'm just looking at it now. It's cool, but I didn't even know it was such a thing.
That hinge looks wild.
It does. Yeah. It makes an impression. And recently, I managed to finally weasel my way into. My wife doesn't spend a lot of time at her home office, and so I managed to steal/borrow her display. So I've got that second display set up in a vertical orientation, and that's really nice too. Although it's huge, it's a 4K display, and the vertical orientation is really awkward, like looking way up and having to like
that's hard on your neck. Yeah, I would think. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's still fun to have.
Yeah, we're going to put a link for the space monitor in the show notes. You guys have to see this thing. It's kind of wild. And it can also, like, it hinges like down to desk level if you want.
Yeah.
Almost like a Microsoft Surface display, you know?
Yeah. I wish it was touch sensitive.
Yeah, it's not, of course it's not, but but it is kind of trippy. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that the iPad was one of those things that drew you into the Apple ecosystem. You mentioned running Windows tablets back in the day. Where does the iPad fit in now as sort of life has changed and the iPad has changed too?
Yeah. So I had a love-hate relationship with it for a while. I think was it John Siracusa who said that it was the best Mac accessory. I really couldn't make it work as my full-time permanent device, but then I always kind of wanted around because, well, as a PhD student, and even in my consulting work, I do a lot of reading and not really browsing, but researching and data analysis of text on the iPad. So the iPad plus a pencil is just so essential. And so that's where it fits in. I've got I make heavy use of DevonThink. We can talk more about that maybe later, but I always have the pencil out. And I guess this is where we can mention that I recently bought a weird accessory for the iPad. That is the G Hold, not the G Hole, as I think we misheard me say earlier. It's not some kind of weird pair of underwear. Yeah. No, it's a giant not pop clip. That's the app
pop
extension.
Socket. Yeah.
Pop socket. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a giant pop socket, and it has a little slot for your fingers to fit in. It's not perfect. It's not. It can be a little uncomfortable to use, but it's certainly more comfortable and more ergonomic than just trying to like single hand hold an iPad 11. It's an 11-inch iPad Pro. I should have mentioned that. And I'm talking hours at a time. Sometimes I'll be reading for 6 or 8 hours in a day like that, and it can get hard on the wrists. So the G Hold has been helping. It gives an extra little place to put your fingers and give yourself some rest.
Oh, guys, if you go to g-hold.com on their website, they've got a picture of 2 of these G Holds stuck to the wall, and somebody hung a MacBook off the wall with a G Hold. It's like literally, hey, you got to see this.
Yeah. That's. I think they sell specific products for hanging laptops, and I don't know if I'd recommend that. But
yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah, but it's surprisingly robust. It uses microsuction.
So.
Yeah, it uses microsuction. At least you can choose between an adhesive and a microsuction when you buy it. And the microsuction, I don't mind holding it upside down over the concrete floor that I'm on right now. I trust it enough for that. But you can peel it off. I've been meaning to write this up for the forum. I think it'd be an interesting sort of product review. But I did buy a pop socket to compare. My question was like, do I need this giant G-Hold thing? Or if I put a pop socket on, is it the same?
Yeah.
And the pop socket helped in similar ways. It's a bit small for the size of the iPad, but I took the pop socket off and it just like was this weird adhesive glue that just like, I had to wrench the iPad in uncomfortable ways in order to take that off. Whereas the G-Hold, if I ever want to switch it back to using the Magic Keyboard or whatever, I can pretty easily peel it off and then reattach it later. It sticks really well.
So you're using the iPad primarily for like PDF annotation and reading.
Exactly. Yeah. PDF annotation.
That's what it's really good at.
Mm-hmm.
Have you tried the new Universal Control?
I haven't played with it. I only just recently updated to 15.4.1. And so I've been meaning to, but I haven't really had a need for it because I've got so many displays already. That extra third or fourth display really, if I wanted it, wouldn't really add much. But I did try the reverse. I forget what it's called now. Why am I forgetting? Sidecar, thank you. I was really excited for Sidecar to come out, and then I was confused. I actually wrote Craig Federici, and he wrote back, or at least one of his many assistants, I'm sure, wrote back, because I was using it with the Magic Keyboard, but you couldn't control your Mac with the Magic Keyboard. So therefore, I take credit for Universal Control. Obviously, that was because of my complaint.
Quick aside, if you haven't tried Universal Control and you've got your Macs and iPads updated, I would recommend giving it a shot, especially if you routinely keep your iPad on your desk, because I find it really useful. And I don't know, I'm just a big fan. But I keep my iPad under my monitor, so I use Sidecar aggressively, and now I use Universal Control. I think both of these technologies are great. The nice thing about Universal Control is, of course, you don't have to have a keyboard anymore with 2 Bluetooth radios into it. You can just put your mouse on your iPad and then start typing with the keyboard attached to your Mac, and it all works.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen, have you done that yet?
Yeah, I've done it some. I mean, since switching to the iPad Mini, using it like as a second display is not as enticing as it was on a bigger iPad, maybe.
Oh yeah, totally.
But
it doesn't make any sense.
I have been super impressed with how smooth it is, and it's like how fun it is. Like you push the cursor and it sort of like pops out of the side of the iPad. All that is like very nicely done, and I think it's cool. I'm not sure how useful it is on my tiny iPad.
Yeah, because I still had my big 2018 iPad Pro, and I was on the verge of selling it. I'm like, then I started using a Sidecar, and I'm like, oh, this is actually really useful because I'm not going to buy a second monitor, but putting this underneath gave me a place to put additional windows and whatnot. But now it's like, yeah, this thing is a fixture. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm. It's a really clever setup. I should mention too, the iPad Mini was the reason I bought the G Hold, because I was jealous of how excited everybody was with their new iPad Minis, and yet the purchase delivery timeline was still months away when I ordered the G Hold, and I was like, you know what? If I could hold this iPad a little bit more easily with one hand, then I bet you I wouldn't be jealous anymore.
Which iPad is it?
It's an iPad. It's the second generation 11-inch iPad Pro.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And honestly, for the type of work you're doing, I think an iPad Mini would be difficult, or it would if you have 50-year-old eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. There was actually a thread on that on the forum, another shout out to the forum, where people were debating the use of the merits of the Mini for a lot of heavy reading. And it was definitely the consensus that it's better to go bigger.
Yeah, I think if you're reading Amazon Kindle books, it's fine. But if you're like reading and annotating documents or PDFs, like the type of work you do when you're getting your PhD, yeah, I think it's too small. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by SaneBox. Go to sanebox.com/MPU to get $25 off and stop drowning in email. I am such a fan of SaneBox. I've been a paying member for, I don't know, at least more than 5 years now, because SaneBox learns what email is important to me and filters out what isn't, saving me hours. The way SaneBox works is when you sign up for an account, it's a web service. It then gets the ability to look at the recipient name and the subject line of your emails. It doesn't look at the contents, just those 2 bits of data. And then it does an automatic sorting. It looks at the email that you respond to quickly and the email that you don't, and it sorts it for you. So in your inbox, when you start the day, is just the most important email. And the stuff that's not so important, it filters out into other folders. It's like having a little assistant 24/7 checking your mail as you come in and sorting it for you. But it's a lot more than that, too. You can also use SaneBox to defer email. You can set up deferred boxes. Like I have one called Saturday, and anything that relates to personal business, like the electric bill or whatever, I just dump it into the Saturday deferred folder. And then on Saturday, I see the email again and deal with it all then. They have additional services, though, because they just keep adding more. One of my favorite is the same black hole, where you can unsubscribe with one click. You just drag an email into the same black hole. You never get an email from that person again. They have Sane Reminders, which is probably my very favorite feature, where I can blind copy or copy an email to SaneBox. And I'll say 1 week at sanebox.com to an email I send to Steven. If Steven doesn't reply to me in a week, then SaneBox says, hey, he didn't reply to that email. What are you going to do about it? I used to have a very complicated system to track email responses, and I threw all of that overboard when I started using SaneBox and got this feature because it's just so handy. So there's a whole lot you can do with SaneBox. You can save attachments to Dropbox. There's just a bunch of features, and you get it all starting as low as $4 a month. They've got a 14-day free trial for Mac Power Users listeners. Just go to sanebox.com/MPU. And if you go there, you get $25 off. MPU listeners subscribe to SaneBox at a surprising rate. And the reason is because you guys get it. You want to make email easier. And I didn't say earlier, but SaneBox can work with just about any email service because it's a cloud service. So whether you're using Apple Mail or Gmail or whatever, it works. So I'm a big fan. I use it every day. You should check it out. That URL, one last time, sanebox.com/MPU to get that $25 off and let them know you came from the Mac Power Users. Our thanks to SaneBox for all of their support of the Mac Power Users. Go check it out today and stop drowning in email.
So, Ryan, we talked about you being a PhD student. I want to talk a little bit about some of the workflows that you employ while in that mode. I was never a PhD student. It's not something I ever pursued. But I would imagine that anything from task management and sort of workload management all the way through actual research and writing, there's stuff that you're doing all over the place that's interesting. I think I'd like to start with something we have in the show notes here about concept mapping. Last week we had Allison Sheridan on. We talked some about diagramming and sort of a way that a lot of people work to visually lay out ideas or information, whether for themselves, and maybe it's just in preparation of writing or research, or to share an idea with somebody else. And I'm curious how you approach that.
Yeah. I should, and I was excited to talk about this because it is actually another kind of use case or use of the iPad. One of the two key apps I use for this stuff is Concept. And it's effectively a sketching app, right? That's what it looks like when you first look at Concepts on the App Store. It looks like you're supposed to use it for architecture. But in reality, Concepts is this brilliant, if you've ever heard of sketchnoting or even just like having an infinite canvas, it's this brilliant app where you can really heavily customize the tools you're using. And even down to, and I love when apps go this far with customization, down to there are some gestures. What do they call it? Like the tap and hold. Yeah. So there's a tap and hold gesture. You can customize exactly what that does, and you can customize how long you need to hold the screen before tap and hold will show up. And so it's this brilliant vector sketching app, but it can be really flexible. You can really customize exactly how you want to use it. And so Stephen mentioned this workflow of concept mapping, which is just really, it's like a more freeform version of mind mapping, right? Sometimes if you're trying to think through something complicated or complex, the linear nature of a mind map where you've got a single node that leads to more nodes, but it can't be nonlinear, it can't be cyclical. That kind of linearity can get in the way. And so I love sitting down if I'm trying to think something through, opening up concepts, in a nice armchair or something, and then sketching it out pieces. And this is where that tap and hold comes into play. It's really easy to use a lasso and tap and hold and select things. So that lets you, with concepts, move things around and make sense of them. So it's really useful.
I can't agree more. This application is amazing. And I don't understand why there aren't 100 apps in the App Store with an infinite canvas, because it's the infinite canvas that really makes it work for you, because you can start with an idea and you just never know how big it's going to get. It's like having a Post-it note that's 8 foot by 8 foot, and you just start writing in a corner of it before you know you fill up the whole thing. I love this application. In fact, the day, Stephen, that I texted you that I was going to quit being a lawyer, I opened up this app and just said, okay, what is my life like without being a lawyer? And I just started concept mapping it. And the thing that makes me want to throw this through the window, however, is that it doesn't sync with the other iPads and it doesn't have a Mac app. And it's like, how did you get so much right and not have syncing in this app is crazy to me. And I paid for a subscription, but I feel like, if they don't have that figured out by the time my renewal comes, I'm going to be looking at, but I even did look. I mean, I could deal with a tool that doesn't have all the bells and whistles that this app does if it just synced and had an infinite canvas, but there really isn't anything out there like it. But yeah, I love and hate this app all at once because of that.
Yeah. They have teased that they've been working on sync, I think, for years now. I remember seeing something on it a couple of years ago, and they still haven't pushed it out. Never make a software purchase based on the promise of a future software development.
Yeah.
But it is, if you just accept it for what it is, it's this like big whiteboard that you can fit in a book bag and carry around with you, then it does work pretty well for that. But it is sad.
Yeah, the way I've kind of used, I end up using it at my desk with that leftover iPad, that huge iPad. But then when I get to my little iPad, what if I want to make a little change to it? But I can't. I have to only work at that one device with it, which in this day and age really isn't that big of a problem, right? You know, my grandpa worked in a coal mine, but but it does bug me. You know, it's like, come on, guys. I mean, come on. But I agree with you though. It is a very powerful app, and it is a great place to cook on ideas.
And it's extensible beyond that too. I used to be a graphic designer. I used to play in Illustrator and Photoshop and all those places. And Concepts, although it doesn't compare, say, to some of the other bigger Sketch or even the Affinity tools that are out there, it can be used for that kind of graphic design. And I've made some pretty neat art with it. I'll just mention I was proud of the art I made for a blog post on integrated thinking environments, which we can link in the show notes. But it was a lot of fun to put a photo in the app. It's a photo of a flower that I took on actually like an iPhone 5-10 years ago, and was able to use classic vector tools to sort of erase parts of the photo and rearrange it in a collage. And it was just so much fun to sit down and play with that while thinking about that blog post. So in spite of its lack of syncing abilities, it is such a neat application.
And then you've also listed the other Infinite Canvas app I use, OmniGraffle. And so how do you use OmniGraffle, and how does that work with Concepts for you?
Yeah, so it kind of is like a first stage of sketching out ideas will show up in Concepts for me. If I really just want to make a mess and I'm not exactly sure, say I'm at the 0 to 1% part of an idea. And then if I need to do anything more formidable in terms of diagramming, having something more legible, I will jump to OmniGraffle. And unfortunately, that usually does mean reproducing some of the sketching I might have been doing in Concepts. But OmniGraffle is just so powerful. I think it's a underrated feature, even though it's celebrated as much as it is. I think it is underrated still. OmniGraffle has, for instance, some built-in mind mapping tools. And if you can configure the keyboard shortcuts effectively, you can actually do a lot of mind mapping the same way you would in MindNode or even an outliner right in OmniGraffle, and it works really well. You can jump, for instance, from shape to shape with a couple of different keyboard extension or keyboard shortcuts. But one of my favorite things to do with OmniGraffle is to get a nice big display and clean up the view. One of my favorite Keyboard Maestro macros is I hit Command and backtick, and in every app I use often, that will clean the view. So it'll hide all of the sidebars and hide the menu bar and just give me nothing but the content. And doing that in OmniGraffle and then using keyboard shortcuts that are sort of built into my muscle memory it's such a clean way of thinking and rearranging and organizing things.
Yeah, I built my little status board in OmniGraffle that way because it wasn't really what the tool was made for, but you can also embed URL links in the notes. So then you just fill your screen with that. You click the nodes and you can jump to whatever app you need to related to any specific project. It's really nice.
It is.
Also, I would argue that OmniGraffle is a tool you use if what you're working on is going to see other eyes than your own. The stuff I do in Concepts, it's for me, and then when I'm going to start sharing with people, I'll clean it up with OmniGraffle.
Yeah. But you can, again, just to reiterate, you can get really artistic with Concepts. And I bet you if you're an illustrator out there and you're trying to think conceptually, make sense of something, do some sketchnoting, I bet you can make something look really good in Concepts. And you can't quite get that sort of artisanal design look in OmniGraffle unless you're tweaking a lot of little windows and modals, and you can make OmniGraffle look really pretty too. I have done quite a few projects in OmniGraffle where I've, say, translated a map of a system and tried to add iconography and color, and it can look really good there too. But there's definitely sort of a place for both of them, I think.
Yeah, you had mentioned at the top of the show that you use OmniGraffle with some of your the work or the stuff you're doing, like with the UN stuff. How does it fit in there?
Sure. One of the main tools that I use in that work is called a causal loop diagram, which is just a type of box. I have a master design, right? And you might have heard the joke before that an MBA is a master of boxes and arrows. Well, the MDes that I have is fancier boxes and arrows. But that's what I do with causal loop diagrams. I draw boxes and arrows and then use those simple little shapes to make sense of a complex system. And that typically looks like a big map of phenomena. So you have, say, I'm trying to think of a nice example. Say you have procrastination as a problem and you're trying to understand procrastination. Actually, I did this recently as I was working on my own procrastination problem. So there's a blog post I can link to. Doesn't use OmniGraffle, but same idea. And you're just trying to understand what causes procrastination. So in a causal loop diagram, you'd draw causes that are associated with a phenomena and then just connect them with arrows. And then you think about what causes those causes and you connect those with arrows. And then eventually you get loops and interesting, call them shapes, archetypes that help you make sense of that complex looping, dynamic, counterintuitive problem.
Yeah. I mean, I've said this on the show before, but so many times in my career, I've had people, want to know who did my graphics for me. And it's always, OmniGraffle.
Mm-hmm. It's really clean. You can really clean things up and make them look good if you make use of. I particularly like what was I thinking? Using iconography and adding icons inside shapes and using gradients and shadows. You have to play with the app for a bit before you get a sense of where, like any professional app, before you get a sense of what you need to change and tune and adjust in order to make it look good. But you can make things look really great.
Now, you said you also use DevonThink a lot with your research and analysis. How does that work?
Sure. So DevonThink is it's a wonderful app. And it's kind of the backbone to a lot of my, say, resource management. I have, as we've heard from you guys before, the same sort of size of databases. I have thousands and thousands of PDFs, and I use DevonThink actually as my RSS reader, my Read It Later service, my eventual PDF reading and annotating service, and lately a sort of Readwise style annotations export. And so that's the coolest, latest workflow I've come up with is I like the idea of Readwise's ability to sort of stream highlights out of Kindle books. And I wanted to figure out how to do that for PDFs. They're working on a beta. I don't think we can say too much about it. The Reader beta is really clean, really powerful. But I don't know if it'll be for me. I think it's I want to be able to own PDFs, and I think it's going to go with the model of saving PDFs in the cloud, which is fine. It's powerful, but I wanted to have a bit more control than that. And maybe, again, it's a beta. I don't want to say too much. Maybe they'll kick me out of the beta at this point if they hear this. But so what I did was with DevonThink, I created a way of monitoring basically when a PDF has been changed, checking if it's got some new annotations, and then it extracts those annotations out into a file that I can then review. And it's this really neat way. What I'm trying to do is create a way of being able to read a ton without really thinking about managing the readings. And so I just want to work with the content of the readings and extract out what I want from them, and then use that in the stuff that I'm creating myself. And DevonThink has a bunch of tools that make that really powerful and really easy.
Yeah. So you're pulling annotations off your PDF from within DevonThink. And how is that? So at Readwise is, I forget the term of art for it. The repetitive, what do they call it?
Spaced repetition.
Spaced repetition system, where it allows you to kind of occasionally see things that you thought were important before. And so you're building the spaced repetition system into DevonThink now? Is that what you're doing?
I'm building the extraction out into DevonThink. You could use DevonThink to do the sort of reading and review as well. Actually, lately, shout out to the DevonThink team because they've been doing a ton of work on editing and working with Markdown files. So you really can do a lot of this. I won't say what tool I use for the actual working with the annotations because it's been banned in this episode. That will not be
named. Yeah, I get it. No, but and honestly, all of us that are so excited about the app that will not be named, the joke may be on us because I do think the DevonThink team is actually putting a ton of effort into Markdown in DevonThink to kind of bring that tool up. I mean, DevonThink is amazing for resources. It's not, in my opinion, as good with text as some of the others, but they're piling on with that right now. So that may be the one solution for all before you know it.
Oh yeah, I mean, one of the marvels of DevonThink is there's this article from Stephen Johnson, the author Stephen Johnson. It's 10 or 15 years old now, in something like the New York Times, and he's talking about using DevonThink as this knowledge management solution that has all these fancy tools. And I mean, it's been around for that long because it's that robust and it's that effective.
Yeah.
And I really think a lot of these new tools are great because they're pushing the DevonTech team to push DevonThink even further. And it's just so good for us end users because we get all these tools.
Oh, yeah.
And then the nice thing about DevonThink is that it integrates so well with so many other things. So if you can use it as that backbone, then it's there, it's sturdy, and it has all these automation powers that are built in that you can take advantage of.
Yeah, and it's also so integrated with the system because, like, file links, you can create links to files on your Mac, with some third-party solutions. But when you put it in DevonThink, that link that you create is rock solid. And for someone who's all about systems, that the ability to link crosswise into your DevonThink library, I mean, that's probably the reason I could never leave DevonThink.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's it makes me feel more secure about having all these different documents, and the search is worth celebrating as well. Full text index search, you can search for things and get them so fast, no matter how many items you've got stored away. So,
well, Stephen, you actually moved your Mac library around a lot of different places for a while there, but now you've been in DevonThink for a year or two. Are you settled? I mean, how do you feel about it?
Oh, I am. I mean, it's the only tool that really works when you have a super large data set. I mean, I was actually opening it in the background, 42,000 individual items in DevonThink. And, I have them sorted into some different databases and collections and stuff, but the search is just as fast with 42,000 items as it was with 400. And like, getting into a topic, past me may not have filed everything exactly where present me would expect it. And so even though I do have things sorted out, I often turn to the search to find something. And the fact that it can find not only markdown and plain text or web archives, but also PDFs, because it can OCR things as they come in, pulling RSS feeds in. It really, in my mind, there's really not anything comparable to it on the Mac. It really, when you're dealing with big data sets, in my mind, and from what I've discovered, it really stands alone.
Yeah. And I think really for me, with version 3, the improvements made the user interface and have either of you ever had a sync problem? Because that's the thing that really sold me, is when it started reliably syncing. I mean, 10 years ago, I felt like the sync was pretty rough. Now I don't even have to think twice about it.
I think it's gotten a lot better. I wish it was. I think it's iOS's fault. We can talk about this more later.
Oh, the iPad sync, yeah.
The lack of background sync and the lack of, I'm sure they would do it if they could, but the fact that I've kind of got to wait every time I open up the app. I know, David, you've talked about running it in late at night on your iPad in order to keep the database synced, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's too bad that we're still dealing with that kind of trouble.
Yeah, you gotta hack the system because Apple won't let them just run background sync for 2 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really don't ever touch it on my iPhone or iPad. I mean, very occasionally, but I really think about it as a Mac app.
Honestly, one of the reasons why I've chilled on the iPad is because of DevonThink. It's like, I don't want to deal with that anymore. I'd rather just have a little MacBook and run my DevonThink library on it,
Yeah, and I don't know about y'all, but when I'm in that sort of research phase, I will have sometimes like dozens of documents open where I got windows going everywhere, and I want to be able to compare them and switch back and forth between them, because I have all this stuff in DevonThink. I want to look at more than one piece of information at a time, and that's not the iPad's strong suit, in case you haven't noticed.
Yeah, but the strong suit is open a PDF and allow me to highlight and annotate it, which is what Ryan needs to do for his doctorate. Sure. So it's like, yeah, I get it.
I think we're almost there. I think we just need Apple to let us do a little bit more with the iPad, and we'll be able to do all these things without thinking too much about which device we're in. The thing that I was going to say about, I don't want to get away from this idea because it's such a huge potential, is DevonThink as an RSS reader. If you've ever used an RSS reader, you're used to like clean, sleek interfaces, being able to say mark on red while scrolling past items. DevonThink isn't going to give you that. But what it does do is give you granular automation-based controls over what shows up in your inbox. And then what I love about it is it turns everything I want. This is what my setup is. I have every single news item show up as a PDF. And so that means that I can annotate every single news item as I want. So if I'm getting scholarly articles showing up or work that I want to extract content from, DevonThink as an RSS reader is really powerful. But then we get kicked in the pants by the lack of background sync and constantly sort of waiting for the iPad to catch up. And so we're in a sort of almost there state, in my view.
Yeah, I hope. I mean, we're going to get, an update to iPad OS, in a couple months. They've already announced June 6th will be the keynote for WWDC this year. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not holding my breath that it's suddenly going to be on par with a Mac, but maybe background sync would be something they could implement this year. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, they have background sync, but they don't really have background sync, if that makes sense, because they don't want the apps to overuse the resources and battery. But like, for instance, my iPad, the one that I've been talking about today, is plugged in all the time. So why not say, well, if it's plugged in, go ahead and let the app do the background sync for an hour. Right. But either way, we are off on a tangent here.
This episode of MPU is made possible by Fitbod. We're all balancing work and family and everything else. It can be hard to make fitness a priority. What you need is a program that works with you, not against you, and that's Fitbod. Fitbod's algorithm learns about you, your goals, and your training ability, and it crafts personalized exercise plans that are unique to you. The app makes it incredibly easy to learn exactly how to perform each exercise. They have videos in there, so you can see exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And Fitbod is really great about not making personal fitness about competition, right? You don't want to look to others and try to stack up against them or do what they do. You need something that will work for you. That's when it sticks, and that's when you'll see the results you're looking for. Fitbod uses data to create and adjust your dynamic fitness plan. You have instant access to your own personalized routine in their fantastic app, so you can make progress on your goals from anywhere. I've been using Fitbod to work out at home for quite a while now, and I've been really happy with it. So I want to talk a little bit about how it uses data. So it gives you a set of exercises to do. Maybe you're going to do curls with some weight. And maybe it says you're going to do 10 reps with 30 pounds, as an example. Say that you get to the end of that, and that was really easy. Well, it makes it easy for you to go in and tell the app, hey, that was easy, next time, increase it. Or the other way around, maybe that was too much. You didn't make the complete set. You can tell it how many reps you made it to before failure. And that all goes into what Fitbod is using to build your next workout plan. They learn from your last workout, so your next one will be even better. Whether you're working out twice a day or twice a week, Fitbod tracks your muscle recovery to make sure your plan is balanced with a variety of exercises to make sure you're not overworking anything. Those brand new video tutorials I mentioned, they're shot from multiple angles, so learning each exercise is a breeze. And it integrates with your Apple Watch, Wear OS smartwatch, and apps like Strava, Fitbit, and Apple Health. Personalized training of this quality can be really expensive, but Fitbod is $12.99 a month or $79.99 a year. You can get 25% off that, 25% off your membership at fitbod.me/MPU. That's FITBOD, fitbod.me/MPU, and you'll get 25% off your membership. Our thanks to Fitbod for their support of the show and Relay FM.
So Ryan, before the break, we were kind of talking about iPad limitations, and we've already teased a little bit that you've kind of had an evolution as an iPad user. Mm-hmm. Take us on the journey.
Sure. Yeah. So it's really an evolution as a tablet user. As I mentioned at the start of the show, I've been using tablet computers for a long, long time. The quick backstory is that I was diagnosed with writing disability in grade 11. Basically, a teacher noticed that I was performing poorly when I had to write a test, but I would be great in class speaking. And so the recommendation was that I start typing. And so I had to bring a laptop in, but I was doing a lot of science, a lot of math. So I didn't want to all have notes on text in one place and written notes on another. So I looked into the Windows tablet PC world and started out with an old Wacom tablet that was built in. I don't think it even had capacitive touch. It was pressure. You had to push into the screen in order to get your finger to work. But the stylus worked so well. And then I kept using tablets or stylus-based tablets for ages. Went through a ton. I encourage folks to look up Samsung Series 7 Slate, which was this ridiculous near iPad that ran Windows 7 that I owned for a while. But all of that sort of was showing me the promise of having this really powerful computer that you could use a pen with. And as I said at the early part of the show, when the iPad came out and Paper by 53 started getting advertised, I was just enthralled. So I jumped with that. I jumped to an iPad. I think I had an iPad mini at first and used one of those Adonit styluses, styli.
Yeah, is that one with a little disc on the end?
Yeah, and it was so annoying.
Yeah,
but you still had that. You had that dream then of the Apple ecosystem, all the wonderful app developers making these amazing, powerful tools, and then eventually we finally got the Apple Pencil, and I was so excited that the day they launched the Apple Pencil, even though it had that annoying stick out of the back of the iPad charging port. So fast forward, now we've got the wonderful Pencil 2. We've got the Apple app ecosystem. And so it's like the dream world from grade 11, me, dealing with this magical modular computer. And yet, as we were saying before the break, it's weirdly held back. And so what I wanted to talk about in this segment is just a bunch of what I think of as paternalism in design decisions. And so there's this scholarly article. You don't have to go dive into it if you don't want to. But effectively, it argues, it's a recent art. It doesn't focus on Apple, but I really saw Apple showing up in the way these authors wrote about paternalism in design. Inherently, if you're a designer, you're making paternalistic decisions, right? You're deciding what a user is using and how they're using it. But I really feel that for some reason, Apple's been missing the mark with, in particular, Pro iPads. There's been a lot of talk over the past couple of years about what Pro means. And it doesn't just mean like a black color, right? It means Pro as in independence and autonomy. And yet, for so many different aspects of using the iPad, it's restrained by Apple not wanting to let people take risks or do something that might potentially be wrong. And I'm not going to get into the security issues, that those are beyond my pay grade. But simple things like running background sync, like we were just talking about, or, and this one's particularly important to my wife, is iCloud and optimizing storage. So she is an Apple user as well. And she is a doctor. And as you can imagine, sometimes in the bowels of a hospital, you don't have great Wi-Fi and you don't have great data. So you go to open up, say, the latest standard on how to treat a certain condition just to double check the numbers or whatever. And suddenly iCloud's like, sorry, we've saved your storage. So you can be happy about the fact that you can't access this file right now. And it's just such a strange problem, because I don't know why a user can't be given the power on an iPad to say, no, don't optimize my storage. I really need all these files. And so that's kind of my rant on paternalism. And I think Apple could tap into, could give users way more power if they relax that paternalism a little bit and let people do what they want with the iPad.
Well, and I'm sure you see that as someone who used to use Windows, because Apple has always been paternalistic with their hardware. I mean, that's kind of been their jam. I mean, I feel like that's in some way a measure of their success, that, you know, you buy a Mac and it just works and you don't have to defrag the drive, and, you know, but you lose the flexibility and power that you get with some of the Windows and Android options, but you get the benefit of stability and something that always works. And so I actually think paternalism to an extent can work, but I agree. I feel like they have gone over the line with the iPad, and I don't understand why. I mean, we've talked about this on the show so much now, it's probably old hat for the listeners, but it just seems like they've just decided that this is as far as we want to go with this device. And you can't now blame lack of technology. I mean, last year they put the same chip in the iPad that they put in the MacBook Air, but they left the iPad largely as is. And that is a decision. And paternalism, I've never heard of that term in relation to technology, but that exactly describes what's going on.
And well, I do want to challenge, though, because the Mac's paternalism isn't really there. In fact, compared with Windows, the automation tools and the sort of underbelly of Mac OS, to me, gives, or at least has historically given users more power than Windows, to be able to script and automate it, at least in my experience. And Yet, if you look at a Windows Surface, it is Windows just as a tablet. And I'm sure people have strong opinions about the Surface. My strong opinion is that it is a brilliant device. It doesn't run Mac, and it doesn't run Mac OS, and that's the biggest problem I have with it. I looked into getting a Surface and doing the Hackintosh thing to it for a long time, but you lose things like Wi-Fi, so it's not going to work. But I'm not advocating that we just put a Mac on, put a tablet, or sorry, a touch-sensitive screen on a Mac, but it's these little things like optimizing storage in iCloud and background activity and multiple windows. Like, we're so close on iPad OS, and yet we're not there yet.
Yeah, it's like, almost like on the Mac, like, let's use the bowling, alley analogy. If you go bowling now, they have guardrails. They didn't have these when I was a kid, but you can push a button and the ball never goes into the gutter, and that's like the out of the box Mac experience. But there's another lane without guardrails on the Mac that if you just want to move over into that, Apple script terminal, all that stuff, you can do whatever you want. I guess you're right. I would agree with you on that. But that lane doesn't exist on the iPad, and it doesn't seem like they have really any desire to even head towards making it.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing I'll say is just, I take issue with the fact that they're calling it a pro device, right? It's like, if you're giving people this idea that they're professionals, then let them be professionals and take a bit of risk.
Others have said this, but I don't think pro means professional when Apple says it. I think they use the label pro to mean something nice or high end. I think so much of the conversation around the iPad just comes from the simple fact of where it started, that it did start as iPhone OS, way back 11 years ago now, however long it's been, and having a decade to unfold itself from that nest, they just haven't moved fast enough, right? We want the iPad to be more Mac-like in a bunch of different ways. Apple has done some of them, hasn't done others, and you just see this this inherent tension in the product that I think has been there from day one. I mean, day one, it was introduced as something better than a phone at this, this, and this, and better than a notebook at this, this, and this. And there's a sweet middle ground. And the iPad's never really been able to escape that. It's never been able to move up to be a true sibling of the Mac in terms of capability. And the reasons for that, I mean, who knows, right? Like, I'm sure that there are endless debate within Apple about where the iPad should fit in and where it should be more Mac-like and where it shouldn't be. And you have all of that history to contend with, and you also have to deal with the fact that its interface being limited to touch for most people. Most people don't have the keyboard and trackpad and pencil, right? Because most people are just buying the most inexpensive iPad. You have to expose these power user level tools in interesting and new ways that have to fit in with that paradigm, right? I mean, you mentioned at the beginning moving to the Mac in large part because of the Unix tools under the hood. I mean, I remember Apple explaining that in the OS X transition, yes, this new interface is beautiful and it runs all your classic Mac apps if you need it to. And also, there's this thing called the terminal, and you have all this, the power of Unix. And in the early days, Apple would, in a new version of OS X, talk about the new version of Unix they were bundling with it, with all these new tools. And there was always this, secondary layer that, if you just want to, open your iBook and do iPhoto, it was great. But if you needed to go further, you could. And it was there from the beginning, at least of OS X. Where the iPad didn't start there, and so now trying to figure out where that should go. I don't envy that design problem, because I think kind of no matter where they move, they're going to make some people unhappy.
Yeah, I don't. Good analysis. I don't think. I think it's, this conversation ends up getting embroiled in all kinds of history about how people think of the iPad. And I don't want to say, let's think about the iPad more as a Mac. In fact, there's a great thread on the forum, and I can't remember exactly what it was called. I'll find it for the show notes. But people were debating this as as they do every couple months on the MPU Talk. And one user pointed out that if you give in to the iPad and the UX that has been envisioned by Apple's designers, it is actually really beautiful. And I liked that challenge. So I did. This was only a few months ago. And I remember just like last week, I was working with a numbers sheet. And I decided to just forget all of the paradigms that I'm used to, right? Forget all of the muscle memory of Mac OS and give in to the touch interface and use every gesture. And oh my God, it was beautiful working with a spreadsheet and selecting a set of range with of numbers with multiple fingers and using the like three finger pinch in and three finger pinch out to cut and copy and paste. It was the fastest I've probably ever interacted with a spreadsheet that way. So if you give in, it's really powerful, but yet we lack multiple windows. We lack background activity. We lack optimizing storage. And so it's only these few things that I see as being holding it back. And I think we're so close. So I'm just hoping that somebody at Apple hears this and thinks a bit more about that paternalism. It's like, don't change what you're trying to make the iPad. It's a beautiful modular system. But at least appreciate that users deserve some autonomy and some independence in burning their battery a bit more, or putting an icon in the bottom right of the screen.
Or when I plug it into an external monitor, it doesn't look like garbage. It just, it's just like, it seems to me, and I don't think any of us are arguing we want the iPad to have the Mac operating system on it. But to me, the best example of like doing this right was their mouse implementation. I mean, they didn't just put a cursor on the screen. They made a mouse cursor that's smart and makes sense for a device like the iPad. In fact, now when I use universal control and my mouse jumps onto the iPad and goes into iPad mode, I think, man, I would kind of like some of these features on my Mac now. But that's what I would like. But it's been, like Steven said, 11 years, and it just doesn't seem like it's that important to them. And using the iPad as it is currently shipping is by far the most sane way to do it, because when you try to make it do things they don't want it to do, you're going to make yourself nuts. But I feel like we talk about this a lot on the show. Are there any other areas that you would specifically like to see them improve on, Ryan?
No, I mean, I'll point to, there's a neat rumor that they are working on more multiple windows support. And that's kind of exciting, because sometimes as a researcher, I need to reference more than two or three things at a time. And so there's the multiple windows, there's the external monitor. Really, I'll be happy if I get background syncing. But I think it's overall, though, that philosophy that, like, let's think about the user as somebody who, yes, we want to protect when they're a new iPad user and they're just getting started. But as they level up, let's take that concept of progressive disclosure in menus and interfaces, and then also give users power and adopt progressive disclosure as a philosophy to let people push through and accept risk. And there's dignity in that.
Yeah, I talk about this before, but I mean, I still think like the Microsoft Surface Studio was a great idea. And Apple, having Apple Silicon now, is in the unique position of making a tiltable iMac that turns into a 27-inch iPad, when you tilt it down. I mean, I think that's something that could exist. I mean, who knows? By the time Apple would get around to it, maybe we're all just wearing contact lenses and we don't have computers anymore. I don't know. Yeah. But I feel like they have the bones more than anybody in this game. They own the operating system. They're so good at hardware. They could make some really revolutionary devices with everything they have. They have all the pieces if they would put them together. But I guess we'll see. I mean, let's see what kind of steps they take in June. Hopefully, we all feel a little better about it after that.
Fingers crossed.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Electric. Go to electric.ai/MPU and unbury yourself from IT tasks. Get a free pair of Beats Solo 3 wireless headphones when you schedule a qualifying meeting. If you're listening to this show, chances are you know about technology. You know how it works, and more specifically, how to make it work for you. And that's great, because if you're a business owner, it means you can create the systems you need to help your business grow. But it also means other people may rely on you for tech support, and that's okay from time to time, but if you're growing a business, your skills and expertise are needed in other areas of the business too. The team over at Electric knows small businesses, maybe like yours, face these challenges. That's why they've solved the problem for you by operating as your IT department. Instead of spending your time sorting through unused application licenses, setting up employee laptops, and answering never-ending IT questions from your team, you can build that empire and offload that job. With Electric acting as your IT department, you can get back to what you're good at. Plus, you get a really cool IT platform to see and manage everything. So if you're hesitant to delegate, you like to have control, I get you. That is a never-ending issue with me. I'm a control freak. I want to control everything. But I can tell you every time I've delegated something like this, the quality of my life has got better, and the quality of the things I really do, the thing that's most important, also improves. Back in my old law firm, I was the IT guy because I was a nerd, and everybody wanted me to help them with their tech, but they never really took that into account when they were looking at my billable hours. I would have loved to have something like Electric back in that day. If you've got a small business and you're spending too much time dealing with tech, you should check out Electric. And for Mac Power Users listeners, Electric is offering a free pair of Beats Solo 3 headphones for taking a qualified meeting. Just go to electric.ai/MPU. That's electric.ai/MPU. Go there now to get your free pair of Beats Solo 3 headphones today for scheduling a meeting. Our thanks to Electric for their support of the Mac Power Users.
All right, Ryan, one thing we've danced around a little bit is that in your work, you are obviously taking a lot of notes. You spoke about how you use Omnigraphal and other tools to make more visual note-taking and that sort of thing. But we got to ask the question, and I can't believe I'm the one to do this, but what's a note, man?
I was supposed to ask you that question. That's why I put that in the show notes. So I was going to turn that around. Yeah. I want to chat about this because I think we tend to think pretty hard about what notes are. You know, we think of a note as a particular kind of file or something. But I do want to advocate for this idea. And I gave a talk to this extent that I have up on my blog. But notes are really any kind of little piece of information that we want to store and save and use later. And so we hinted that we're going to be talking about recipe apps later on in the Mac Power Users or Mac More Power Users segment. And a recipe app is really a collection of notes about, what meals you're going to make this week, right? And so what we're seeing in present day is, I mentioned earlier, this idea that DevonThink has been powerful for 15 years. And yet lately we've seen the rise of Roam and Obsidian and Notion and Logseq and Craft and all these different tools. But what they all really are is different ways of organizing whatever you think of as useful information about your world, right? And that's my PhD topic, or my PhD field is information systems. An information system is anything that helps you represent the world around you, whatever matters to you in that world, maintain that representation over time and interact with it. And so we're seeing some really neat advances in that area right now in all these different apps. It doesn't really matter what app you use, but no matter what, you're thinking with these new tools, and you're using notes in new ways. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, there was something that Merlin Mann said probably 12 years ago on Back to Work. And I think about it pretty often. And it was along the lines of, there's nothing that I won't write down. I forget the exact quote, but sort of the idea is there's nothing too small to track. There's nothing that's seemingly not important enough to go in this precious new notebook I bought. And that idea has really stayed with me over the years, that a note can be something as simple as 2 or 3 words or a screenshot or just something. I mean, sometimes, especially on the go, I'll make a note as a placeholder to come back later, as a springboard for further thought. And one thing that is cool about all of the apps and tools that we have, and we are really in a renaissance right now with these applications, is that it's so easy to do that when the only thing on you is your iPhone, or even in some cases, like with drafts, your Apple Watch, where you can just quickly put a seed of something down and then come back to it later.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all with that getting more programmable, right? With all of these different apps, we're seeing ecosystems of plugins and extensions and scripts and even the underlying file system, right? One of the coolest things about a lot of these apps is that they have a kind of permissionless integration approach where you can just like take the content and get it into something else and use it without needing to worry too much about whether or not another developer has implemented an integration directly in. And there's just something so powerful with that. And so, yeah, I just wanted to bring this topic up in order to advocate for this idea that our notes, no matter what you're taking notes on, your notes are an information system, and thinking about it as this system where it's not just the computer, not just the app. It's like how you interact with particular kinds of apps, particular kinds of workflows, for particular kinds of notes. And something I've been thinking about recently, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but there's that old idea of IQ, people gauging people's intelligence, but with these random skill testing exams. And I've done a formal IQ test when I was diagnosed with dysgraphia in grade 11. It's this weird abstract thing, but we've really been moving past the ability of IQ to predict something like intelligence or knowledge ability. And with this new renaissance, people are actually not just their innate intelligence, if you can even use that idea, but people are their ability to use all these tools too. So often I see, in our circles, MPU on the MPU forum and on Automators and all these other places, people kind of make fun of themselves for switching back and forth in apps and using different kinds of tools. And yet, to me, all of those different practices really advance your skills as somebody working with knowledge, working with your notes. And that points to, in my opinion, a new kind of IQ, some kind of new measure of your ability to innovate and to be impactful. And it's not just whatever you have, it's you plus how you work with these different tools. And that's really cool. It's exciting.
Well, I feel like the rise of all these applications is not coming from a vacuum. I mean, the best book I read last year was Annie Murphy Paul's Extended Mind book, and the idea that, we do need to have systems to manage this stuff externally. And we are living in a world that is far more complex and information dense than any humans have ever encountered. I remember I talked about this in the paperless book, but when my parents died, they had a cardboard box with like my dad's discharge paper from the army. And like, it was like, one cardboard box had their whole life in it of paper, and that's like what we get in our mailbox every day now, not to mention all the email and digital stuff that's thrown at us. And like, we have to manage this. And, you're an extreme version as a PhD student, but it doesn't matter if you're a plumber, you've got a lot more paper than plumbers did 50 years ago. And, we have to figure this out. And I think the reason why suddenly people are interested in linking and Devon Think style database and all this stuff is because we don't have a choice. The mountain is coming for us. If we don't have a way to navigate it, we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think this is a huge deal. I think it's something that everybody needs to be aware of. And it's not a one-size-fits-all problem. So, if you're giving yourself a hard time for trying different, pants on here, no, you're doing the right thing. You got to find the pants that fit, And so just, it's fine. And but I love the fact that you are like, in essence, making this your field of study. Of how people process this and the workflows and the way it works. I mean, of course, I wanted to have you on the show when I understood what you're doing.
Thanks. Yeah.
But I do think this is something that everybody needs to struggle with and be aware of because the mountain is only getting bigger.
I agree. And I think we use the term knowledge management, and that kind of might make a lot of people feel like, oh, I'm not managing knowledge. But really, again, to reiterate that point at the top of this segment, if you take notes, which you do, because everybody takes notes, because everybody's, trying to keep their grocery list or a book of recipes or information about their trade, right? David mentioned plumbers. Like, my God, the kind of code regulations and instructions and different kinds of materials that people in trades need to keep up with these days. We're all knowledge workers, right? And so these tools really have a huge potential for helping people work with all kinds of knowledge and make the most of it.
We talk about this stuff in relation to information retrieval or study of deep things like, religion or, whatever is important to you. But I can tell you earlier today, I took my dog in to get groomed, and I have a note that I track that. So when we're thinking, well, when is it time to go? When we go last, that's just a little piece of information that I write down. It takes me a few seconds, but I always know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I think that's kind of, I want all of that stuff external. I want to use the synapses between my ears to come up with ideas and to make great things, not to remember when I got the dog's haircut.
Exactly.
Ryan, tell me, there's this thing I keep hearing that, like, if we take notes by writing things down with a pen, that we're going to remember them better than if we type them. Has your study brought you into that question? I've always wondered if that's true or not.
I don't know if I agree with the research that has been done on that, because we are only studying people who haven't been using tech as the current generation has been, right? And so it's like, to me, there's a potential selection bias in that if you're working with participants in these studies who have been using pen and paper from, the age of 4 or 5 to do most of their work, and then eventually they switch into linked thinking or text-based or digital tools. But we're then asking them or testing their abilities to, say, remember something based on whether they wrote it down or whether they typed it. I think there's probably a lot of inherent questions about, again, that relationship between you and the workflow and the tool and the content that can't really be tested in a lab environment, at least not yet. So I haven't looked into the scholarship. Like, don't at me. But I do worry that some of the work that we're seeing on this stuff is perpetuating some ideas that digital tools are inferior in some ways, when perhaps maybe it depends on how used we are to the tools themselves. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. And I also just don't like the idea of people coming up with a way to take notes and then everyone telling them they're doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. I feel like this is such a personal thing that each one of us has to figure this out for ourselves, which kind of leads to the next question. How do you, Ryan J.A. Murphy, how do you take notes? I mean, what are the tools you use to keep track of things?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of them have been mentioned already, but for me, it's often the relationship between some reading, some reference, which is often saved as a PDF for me, in a bunch of annotations and sometimes in scribbles on the side using stylus, and a bunch of different, markdown notes all over the place. And again, we're dancing around this idea of Obsidian, and I shouldn't be using the word, but
no, it's okay. We're not going to get into how we use it because we've been covering it too much. But yeah, so Obsidian's where you put notes. Okay.
Yeah.
What about when you want to capture something quick? I mean, Obsidian's not great at that.
Oh, it still is for me. I use I open it often enough on my phone that it's not that slow to sync up. I use iCloud as a background for that. And
you wrote a plugin called Workbench,
exactly.
Of course. I just remembered.
Well, yeah. Exactly. The particular plugin that I use for this is called Lumberjack, because it's for logging your thoughts. But it's just a single button, uses a URL scheme, and then saves a new file. Yet, that same. So you mentioned that. You don't like when people sort of have a dogma about this. And I agree with that. And yet I'd also want to push back on that idea a little bit. I think there are some best ways, some best practices. And I don't have the answers, but I think we do need a lot more work and scholarship and practice in getting there. So in my work, in my research, there's a field called design science. And design science is about the science of design, right? If you have a design, how do you test it? How do you put hypotheses into the world about how exactly that design works? And based on that idea, can you test those hypotheses and prove that there's a good idea or a bad idea about how to design this tool, right? And I think that applies to workflows as well. So we don't have answers yet, but I do think that we are getting to what one author called technological rules. In situations like X, where you're trying to do Y, you might want to try to do Z as an action. And I think what we're seeing with some of these theorists, say, the Tiago Fortes of the world, even the David Allens of the world, is that there are some principles that do seem to work fairly robustly across people and across use cases. And I think we need to test those more, but we can get to some pretty good ideas about how we should be working.
It's a challenge. And because the technology keeps changing, that doesn't help anything.
Mm-hmm.
I have found personally that I've gone almost all digital on this stuff because I've played with the analog tools over the years. I do journal with an analog journal sometimes, but not every day. But there's just something to the fact that you've got the iPhone in your pocket at all times. And if you can effectively capture and process with that, it's crazy when I think of the information I carry with me in my pocket now compared to, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And we're getting more and more powerful tools to be able to quickly and effectively organize and navigate all that via the software, right? Something I've been thinking of as like maybe this is stupid, but software is like, it's the techniques that you individually develop to work with certain kinds of software that you keep going to over and over again. Yeah. And it's almost automation, but it's things that aren't automated, right? And I think we're going to see more and more of that as these tools get refined and as we use them for years and decades.
Yeah, especially tools that let you customize, additional add-ons and things like Obsidian does. Sorry, Stephen.
No,
but I mean, it's not even that. I mean, like Shortcuts is another great example of what I would call software, using Ryan's term, in that you can create an interface to, like, if you want to capture an idea to drafts, and you can create an interface that you're not writing software, but you are customizing the way it works.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're coming up with patterns, right, in how you work with them. Again, it isn't always automations. Shortcuts is a good example, but say you're using something like Craft. If you keep a dashboard note, as Vitici has talked about using in Obsidian, if you keep a dashboard note in Craft or in Notion, then you're using this concept of software. You're using a particular kind of workflow. But the neat thing is that the workflow depends on the app, and yet it can be also agnostic. You can move it to other apps, and it can still help you be that better knowledge worker.
It feels to me, and I haven't really figured this all out for myself yet, but two fundamental precepts of anything, if you want to explore this, or I guess two ideas that give you a lot of flexibility is, number one, the tools you use are URL friendly. And by that, I mean, you can link between them. We talked about it earlier with DevonThink. I mean, DevonThink is very friendly with other apps because you can link into it or out of it with anything. And then the other thing to me, I would think, is as little as possible interference with the source data. The ability to, to have data in one system that can be accessed in another system. And I'll use DevonThink again as another example. DevonThink makes it very easy to get your data out of it. You can add some metadata in DevonThink that won't travel outside of the app, but in large part, like the annotations Ryan is doing in DevonThink on PDFs, that's going to travel with the file outside of DevonThink. And I think those are the two things you want, is the ability to link, the ability to move the data.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I meant by the term permissionless integration earlier. It's like you don't want to have to ask or wait for somebody to develop something that lets you use your data and information and notes the way you want. You want to find a way that you can always sort of work with the same subset, that same, call it a model, the ideas that you have in one place without duplicating it and making it redundant, but taking it across different apps and so on.
Yeah, I'm spending a lot of time right now in that space. I'm putting together the dates for I'm going to do another wall calendar this year, like I did last year on Kickstarter. And one of the longest tasks last year was actually picking the dates to highlight, right? Because I have whatever it is, more than 40,000 things in Dev. I think a lot of those have dates in them, and trying to sort through what I want to highlight. And a mistake I made last year was in the document. I've been using Apple Notes for this because I like the way their checklist feature works. I've been, cataloging what dates I want to highlight. So in January, I went this date, this date, this date, this date. This is the day and year, and this is what happened, right? And when it came to fact check last year, I had to basically walk through all that research again and search for it and find it. And this year, one of the things I'm doing to make that a little bit easier is I can link to my sources in DevonThink anywhere in my system, because I can just get the URL for that item inside of DevonThink, and I can log those now next to the date. So say January 7th, 2003, Apple did this, and here are my three sources backing up that date. So when it's time to fact check all of this, which is an important step in the process. It helps facilitate that a little bit better. I'm not having to move those documents anywhere. I'm not having to copy and paste chunks of them into my list of dates. It's just a simple URL that brings me back exactly where I was, and it's going to save me just a boatload of time when it comes to check all these dates.
And not only with DevonThink can you link to the document, you could link to the page. You could say, go to this document, page 7, and it's going to go to that page. I mean, it's just, and this is kind of gets to my idea earlier about the importance of URL linking. Like when I put a bill in OmniFocus, I'll put a link to the bill, to pay the property taxes, because in California you got to pay them on a certain date, but they send it to you like 3 months in advance.
Right.
So I just put a link in the OmniFocus task to the bill that's in DevonThink, and I'm just push one button and I go back to it when the time comes. But I mean that those are very everyday things. But I guess I just can't say enough to people listening that I feel like this is the next tech survival skill we all need. We're overwhelmed with data. We need to build systems in our technology that allow us to fight against it and not feel like we're out of control. I hear from so many people that feel like they've completely lost control of this, and the tools are suddenly emerging to help you bring order to the chaos.
That's right. And Nick, you had Nick Milo on a couple of weeks ago, I think, and he said something in another talk he gave that really resonated with me, which is that you have to build these systems yourself. So this hints at that idea that you said earlier, David, that you can't really adopt something from somebody else wholesale. You do need to kind of grow with these systems. Sure, you can see what other people are doing. And again, I think there are best practices for certain kinds of workflows. And yet, if you just try to copy what somebody else is doing, it's not going to be symbiotic with you. And these things really are symbiotic. And so that's a really important flag. Maybe that if you're having trouble with this sort of stuff, maybe that's why. It's because you're trying to sort of stack things on top of what you're doing instead of integrating them in some deeper way by building it yourself over time.
This episode of Mac Power Users is made possible by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to build your brand and grow your business online. Build a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything, products, services, or even content. Squarespace has you covered. You can use insights to grow your business. Squarespace has amazing analytical tools, so you can dig in to see where site visitors are coming from, how you're generating sales, what channels are most effective, and then you can take all that information and grow your business. So you get started with best-in-class website templates and customize them to fit your needs. It's easy as browsing a category of your business to find the perfect starting place, and you can customize it with just a few clicks. I love building on Squarespace. I've built a bunch of sites there over the years, some for myself, some for other people, and it's just a fantastic place to go because everything is under one roof. You're not going around and putting different components together. Squarespace has everything you need. Head on over to squarespace.com/MPU for a free trial. There's no credit card required. When you're ready to go, use the offer code MPU. It's going to save you 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain name. Once again, that's squarespace.com/MPU and the code MPU for 10% off your first purchase. Our thanks to Squarespace for supporting Mac Power Users and all of Relay FM.
Ryan, we always like to finish these interviews asking our guests some of their favorite apps and services. Are there any that bring you particular joy or delight?
Yeah, I really wanted to think of a couple ones that I haven't heard on the show before, and I think I've got two. So the first one is if you're a fan of Breathe, the watch app, now called Mindfulness, I think. There's an app called Pause, and it's iOS, but it actually you can get it on the Mac, and it's a bit wonky there, but it's kind of fun. And it's the idea is finger Tai Chi. And so it presents you with this little display and it says, touch the screen. So you touch the screen and then it starts moving the dot and says, follow the dot. And the exercise is to slowly follow that dot around the screen as a mindfulness exercise. And I find it even more effective than Breathe. It's like a really neat way of sort of trying to just take a second And with motion and with rhythm, center yourself and take a step back from whatever you were doing. And it's really sleek, really well designed. It was sort of defunct for a while. They weren't updating it, and it seems to have gone under new management, which means I think it's a subscription. I haven't looked into it too much because that basic function still works for me. But it's really wonderful, really elegantly designed.
Yeah, that's cool. I've never heard of this app before.
It's so neat. It's so peaceful.
And then any others?
Yeah, sure. So the second one is I've been curious about getting away from Google for a while. And the hardest thing to get away from with Google is, some probably would argue Gmail, but I've managed to almost escape that with Fastmail. But there's a new search engine in town called, I think it's Kagi, it might be Kaji, but Kagi. It's in beta right now. You have to ask for an invite. It still kind of uses Google, but it's a privacy-driven way of searching the Google index plus some other search engines. So Techlist is another one, and Bing is another one. And it integrates all of those in the results it returns. And so Kaki is pretty cool, and it has been pretty robust. Every once in a while, I still fall back to Google, but they're growing really fast. They're one of those new teams who are building quickly. And on top of that, they've also designed a browser called Orion that's based on WebKit. So it's very similar to Safari. It's faster than Safari in the tests that I've done. And yet it has a lot of the same benefits that we love Safari for. And on top of that, you can install Chrome and Firefox extensions and use them with a WebKit browser. And it's available on macOS, iOS, and iOS. Again, still in closed beta, but you can ask for an invite and get in there. And it's pretty sleek. The Chrome extensions and Firefox extensions don't work perfectly yet, but I think they'll get there.
Yeah, I feel like the extensions getting into Safari has not been as fast as I would have liked it to have been. I know Apple has made it easier, but it seems like it's still not going. It's not moving very quickly.
Yeah, it's taking a bit of time for some of those tools, and I some of them I don't think we'll ever see, unfortunately, at this point, just because of developer inertia or something. But this provides a really neat way of people avoiding that and still using Safari and WebKit.
Well, those are all great picks, Ryan. I'm going to have to check them all out. We've got a little more, but we got to let Ryan go, and we want to thank you, Ryan, so much for coming on the show and giving us your time today. I am so interested in your topic of study and the progress of your career. Please keep us posted. We will definitely be watching uniforms. We'll definitely have you back on the show at some point. And anybody who wants to learn more from Ryan, I strongly recommend you go to your RSS reader of choice. Maybe it is Devon Think, and go to axel.design and sign up. I always, Ryan is a high signal to noise blogger. Anything he puts up, I want to read. Not up every day, but it's good because everything you put up is quality, and I really appreciate that. So go check that out, gang. Anywhere else people should go look for you, Ryan?
You can find me all over the internet as Ryan J.A. Murphy, just so you don't mix me up with all the other Ryan Murphys in the world.
Yeah, no worries. And good luck with everything, man.
Thanks so much.
All right. I know we talked about your new Mac Studio last week, Stephen, but you've got another week under your belt. Any further impressions?
Yeah, I continue to be just really impressed with it. I have found a couple more sort of weird software things. So I think I mentioned in More Power Users last time that I've been having issues with login items, things that were supposed to launch at startup weren't. And so after we recorded, I went through that system preference pane and I removed everything and just sort of added the things back. They're mostly menu bar apps, right? I got a bunch of them like everybody else does. And since sort of resetting it up, that's been totally fine. The things that I've told to be there are staying there. So maybe this is a little hiccup with the transition or with the migration or something. But after spending all of 5 minutes telling macOS what I want at startup, it's behaved. So that's good.
Are you still kind of in the honeymoon looking at the cute little piece of metal under your screen there?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's cute. But it is small. And we had some questions about the noise. And I think I talked about it a little bit, but I can hear it if I sit really still and try to focus on it. But outside of that, I don't hear this thing.
I did a virtual meetup last week in the MacSparky Labs, and there were 4 or 5 people there that had them. And nobody said that the noise was a problem for
Yeah.
them. Like, one guy said that he has tinnitus, and his old, I think it was a MacBook Pro, the fan noise would help offset the tinnitus. And now that the room is quiet, he almost wishes it made some noise,
Oh,
But
no.
I know, weird problem, but I get it. But yeah, I feel like the noise thing might be a little overplayed. But if you get one and it's too noisy before you take it back, I would say Apple's got a 2-week return period.
I've had a week of production work on it now as well. So having edited and published a couple episodes of Connected, one of Ingenious, and some membership stuff, under load, it definitely isn't any louder, but boy, is it quick. And I was coming from a fast machine. I mean, the 12-core Mac Pro was no slouch by any means, but especially in things that are multi-threaded, this is just unbelievably good. So things like rendering a WAV file to an MP3 in Forecast, for instance, which is something I do all the time. So I'm very familiar with how long it should take. It's really fast. Same thing with bouncing or exporting out of Logic. So Logic has a feature called offline bounce. So back in the day, rewind, if you had an hour-long audio file, it would take an hour to export because it had to play it in real time. And at some point along the way, Logic added offline bounce, which meant, hey, export this as fast as the computer can do it. Don't worry about real time. Go faster than real time. And other DAWs have added it as well. One reason I started using Logic back in the day was it had offline bounce when not many other things did. But especially on Connected, which I edit, it's about an hour and a half long. It's about the same length as an MPU episode. I've really noticed how much faster it will export from Logic just to a WAV file out on the disk. And some of that CPU, some of that is also SSD. In fact, exporting and really doing anything with big media files, disk speed is a big factor in how long things take. And it's just so fast.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point of like, did that actually work? Like, is something broken? Did it fail?
Yeah.
But there it is. There's the WAV file sitting safe and sound where it's supposed to in Finder.
I mean, it was when I started, because I do a lot of Final Cut renders, and it was like so exponentially faster that I thought, well, I got to watch the whole thing to make sure there's nothing wrong here, because that shouldn't have happened that fast, But then also when it comes to like Final Cut and Logic, Apple Silicon is a big cheater, right? It like has subroutines written into the silicon to make those apps run faster. So of course it's going to run circles around Intel at that point. But anyway, well, I'm glad you like it. And I've not had an experience from anybody that didn't like their Studio Mac. So I think that Apple hit a homer here.
Yeah. And the Mac Pro is, it's gone. It's at its new home, and shipping a 84-pound box was a real adventure, but I got it done.
I bet. Yeah.
It is, one thing that I hadn't really considered was just the presence the Mac Pro has. Right? Like anytime anybody came in here, they'd say something about it. It just took up a lot of space, and I loved it. Like, don't be wrong, like, my favorite computer I've ever had.
Yeah.
But now, like, the Mac Studio is just tucked. It's under the Pro display. I'll have a link in the show notes to my Gear page. I updated that the other day to make up for the fact that the Mac Pro was gone. And you can see in the pictures, like, if you're not looking for it, you don't even really see it. And there's something kind of nice about that. It's definitely not as clean as like the all-in-one, the iMac lifestyle that I still miss sometimes, but it's pretty close. And you can definitely do it in such a way that's like very neat and tidy. And I know for a lot of Mac users, we care about that sort of stuff. That's one reason we're Mac users. And so having this like little box where all the cables go out the back and it's all nice and neat, like there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, totally. Well, either way, we are the Mac Power Users. You can find us over at relay.fm/MPU. We gave links for Ryan earlier, but he's just such a smart guy. I love having him on. But you can find him at axel.design. And I meant what I said. He does a great job with his blog posts. Very thoughtful gent. So go check that out. And thank you to our sponsors today, Sanebox, Fitbod, Electric, and Squarespace. and we'll see you next time.